The food court buzzed with weekend shoppers, families sharing meals, teenagers laughing over phones. Emma Wilson sat alone, focused on her sandwich, feeling the vibrations of the busy mall through the soles of her shoes. At 15, she'd mastered the art of existing in a world of sound she couldn't access, reading environments through movement and expression. She didn't notice the commotion beginning behind her. Didn't hear the raised voices. Didn't know about the wallet reported missing 2 tables over. The first indication something was wrong came as a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. Emma jumped, startled by the sudden contact, and turned to find a uniformed officer looming over her. His mouth moved rapidly, face tight with authority. Emma immediately touched her ear and shook her head, her hands moving to form signs, "I am deaf. I cannot hear you." The officer's expression hardened. He spoke again, louder this time judging by how his jaw clenched, pointing at her bag. Emma reached for her phone, her lifeline for communication with hearing people, but the officer misinterpreted the movement. In seconds, she was yanked from her chair, spun around, and forced face down onto the cold tile floor. Her cheek pressed against the hard surface as the officer's knee dug into her back. Emma's hands, her voice in a silent world, were wrenched behind her. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists. She tried to turn her head, to see what was happening, to somehow communicate, but the pressure on her back increased. Emma's eyes widened in panic. The world around her became a blur of movement and faces. She couldn't hear the gasps from onlookers, couldn't hear the officer's commands, couldn't hear her own rapid breathing as fear coursed through her body. Her hands, the very tools she needed to speak, were now bound behind her back. She tried to mouth words, to make any sound that might alert the officer to her condition, but the pressure on her back made even that difficult. Through tear-filled eyes, Emma saw phones raised around her. People were recording. Some looked concerned, others curious, a few outraged. A woman stepped forward, gesturing wildly at the officer, but was waved back. Officer James Mercer maintained his position, one knee firmly planted between Emma's shoulder blades as he radioed for backup. From his perspective, he had detained a non-compliant subject who had reached for an unknown object when questioned about a theft. Standard procedure. By the book. What he failed to notice was the medical alert bracelet on Emma's wrist, now partially hidden by the handcuffs. What he didn't see were the subtle signs that might have told him this wasn't defiance but a desperate attempt to communicate. Emma felt herself being pulled upward. The officer's grip was firm as he brought her to her feet. Her legs trembled beneath her. The food court had gone from a place of independence to a stage of public humiliation in mere moments. A second officer arrived, speaking to the first. Emma tried to focus on their lips, to understand anything in this nightmare. The second officer noticed something the first had missed. He tapped Mercer's shoulder and pointed to Emma's wrist where the edge of her medical alert bracelet peeked out from beneath the handcuffs. Mercer leaned closer to read it, his expression shifting slightly. But it was too late to undo the scene that had unfolded. Too late for the dozens of witnesses who had watched a young woman forced to the ground. Too late for the videos already being uploaded to social media platforms with captions like, "Cop tackles girl at mall," and "Police brutality caught on camera." Emma was led through the food court, past staring faces and pointing fingers. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment and confusion. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply existed in a space, deaf in a hearing world, and somehow that had become threatening. In the security office, an officer finally removed one handcuff, allowing Emma limited use of her hands. Immediately, she signed "deaf" while pointing to her ears. The realization dawned on Officer Mercer's face, a look Emma had seen countless times before. That moment of comprehension followed by discomfort, sometimes pity, occasionally guilt. A notepad was pushed toward her. Emma wrote with shaking hands, "I am deaf. I was reaching for my phone to communicate. Please call my mother." The officers exchanged glances. One left the room while Mercer stood guard, avoiding eye contact with Emma. The damage control had begun, but the damage itself was already done. Outside, the crowd had grown. Mall security attempted to disperse onlookers, but the videos were spreading. In the small security office, time stretched endlessly for Emma. Each minute felt like an hour as she sat under the watchful eye of Officer Mercer. She kept her gaze fixed on the door, willing her mother to appear. Catherine Wilson had received the alert from the shared location app she and Emma used, a safety measure they'd established years ago. When Emma's location remained fixed at the mall security office for too long, Catherine knew something was wrong. The text from an unknown number confirming her fears had sent her racing to her car. Meanwhile, Emma's isolation deepened in the silent room. Without her phone, confiscated during the arrest, she had no way to reach out to anyone. The notepad they'd given her felt woefully inadequate for expressing the storm of emotions inside her. She wrote another note, "Why am I here? What did I do wrong?" Officer Mercer read it, his face a mask of professional detachment. He wrote back, "Suspected involvement in theft. Witness pointed you out." Emma's hands trembled as she wrote, "I was eating alone. I didn't take anything. Check my bag." Her backpack sat on the desk, its contents already examined and found to contain nothing suspicious, just textbooks, a water bottle, her wallet with $23, and a power bank for her phone. The door opened. Catherine Wilson burst in, her face a mixture of fury and concern. She immediately began signing to Emma, her hands flying in a conversation Officer Mercer couldn't understand. "Are you hurt? What happened? Did they hurt you?" Emma Reeves was born into sound. For her first 3 years, she delighted in her mother's lullabies, giggled at her father's deep laugh, and babbled back to both in the musical language of toddlers discovering their voice. Home videos from those early years captured her singing along to Disney movies, her pitch-perfect rendition of "Part of Your World" making her father beam with pride during his rare visits home between deployments. Then came the fever. 2 weeks after her 3rd birthday, Emma woke crying, her small body burning with heat that wouldn't break. The pediatrician initially diagnosed an ear infection, but when Emma's temperature spiked to 104 degrees Fahrenheit and she became lethargic, Catherine rushed her to the emergency room. The diagnosis, bacterial meningitis, launched a frantic battle for Emma's life. For 7 days, Emma lay in the pediatric ICU, her tiny form connected to machines that beeped and whirred in a symphony her parents prayed she would live to hear again. David Reeves, pulled from a classified operation in Eastern Europe, sat stone-faced by her bedside, his special operations training useless against an enemy he couldn't fight. Emma survived. The doctors called it miraculous. But as the infection retreated, it left devastation in its wake. The meningitis had damaged her cochlear nerve, resulting in profound bilateral hearing loss. The sounds that had filled her world, her mother's voice, music, laughter, even her own words, vanished into silence. "She'll never hear again." David had asked the specialist, his voice flat, controlled, betraying none of the emotion churning beneath. "The damage is permanent," the doctor confirmed. "But there are options. Hearing aids won't help with this type of loss, but cochlear implants might provide some sound perception." Catherine, who had been interpreting for deaf clients for years as part of her work as a language specialist, immediately began researching. The more she learned, the more she questioned whether cochlear implants were right for Emma. The surgery carried risks, the results varied widely, and many in the deaf community viewed implants as an attempt to fix something that wasn't broken. The decision created the first real rift in David and Catherine's marriage. "She deserves to hear," David argued. "To have choices. She deserves to be accepted for who she is," Catherine countered. "To be part of a community that celebrates her, not one that sees her as broken." Their arguments continued for months, complicated by David's deployment schedule and the classified nature of his work. As a member of an elite special operations unit, he spent more time in undisclosed locations than at home. The distance made meaningful conversation difficult, especially about something as nuanced as their daughter's future. In the end, they compromised. They would hold off on implants, immerse Emma in deaf culture and ASL, but revisit the decision when she was old enough to participate in it. By then, Catherine reasoned, technology might advance, and Emma would have the language foundation to thrive either way. At 4, Emma began attending a school for the deaf, where she flourished in an environment built for children like her. Her hands quickly became as expressive as her voice had once been, her face and body learning to communicate with a fluency that amazed her teachers. At home, Catherine ensured ASL was the primary language, with David learning alongside his daughter during his brief periods home. "She's still our Emma," Catherine reminded him during a video call when Emma was 5, after she performed a poem in ASL for her kindergarten class. "Just experiencing the world differently." David nodded, watching his daughter's hands fly through the signs she was showing him. He was missing so much of her childhood, and now he had to work twice as hard to connect with her across the divide of both distance and silence. He began learning ASL during long flights between missions, practicing with fellow operators who found it useful for silent communication in the field. By age 7, Emma had developed a distinct personality that transcended her deafness. Fiercely independent, wickedly smart, and possessed of a visual acuity that sometimes seemed supernatural, she navigated her silent world with confidence. She could read lips with remarkable accuracy, though she preferred ASL for its expressiveness. She excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and visual arts. But the world outside her school and home wasn't built for people like Emma. Catherine watched her daughter navigate this reality with a mixture of pride and heartache. Simple activities, ordering at a restaurant, asking for help in a store, participating in community sports, became exercises in patience and persistence. Some people spoke too fast for lip reading. Others grew impatient with written communication. A few treated Emma as if her deafness affected her intelligence. Catherine channeled her frustration into advocacy. She joined the board of a national deaf rights organization, lobbied for improved accessibility laws, and conducted sensitivity training for local businesses. Her work often brought her into contact with law enforcement, teaching officers how to recognize and appropriately interact with deaf individuals. Communication barriers can escalate situations unnecessarily, she would explain during these trainings. A deaf person who doesn't respond to verbal commands isn't being defiant, they simply can't hear you. The irony that her own daughter would one day face exactly this scenario never occurred to her. David's career continued to advance, taking him deeper into the shadowy world of special operations. As Emma grew, the nature of his work became harder to explain. How do you tell a child that daddy disappears for months because he's hunting terrorists? That the scars on his body came from people trying to kill him? That he misses dance recitals and science fairs because he's preventing attacks that will never make the news? Instead, they developed a simpler narrative: Daddy helps keep people safe. It was true enough, and it gave meaning to his absences without burdening Emma with the weight of his reality. Despite the distance, David maintained a presence in Emma's life through technology and tradition. They had a standing video call every Sunday when operations allowed. He learned to sign fluently enough to communicate without Catherine's interpretation. And he established security protocols for his family that went far beyond what typical military families implemented, a fact that would later prove crucial. By 15, Emma had developed into a remarkable young woman. Tall for her age, with her father's analytical mind and her mother's expressive features, she moved through the world with the heightened awareness common to those who rely primarily on visual information. Her dark curls were often pulled back in a practical ponytail, her brown eyes missing nothing. She attended a mainstream high school with interpreter support, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while participating in the school's visual arts program and captaining the girls' swim team. Emma's relationship with her deafness had evolved over the years. She didn't view it as a disability but as a different way of experiencing the world. She was proud of her identity as a deaf person and her connection to deaf culture. At the same time, she recognized the challenges it presented in a hearing-dominant society. Sometimes I feel like I live in two worlds, she signed to her mother one evening. The deaf world, where everything makes sense, and the hearing world, where I'm always translating, always working harder just to have basic conversations. Catherine nodded, understanding both as a mother and as someone who straddled those worlds professionally. That's why your voice matters. You help bridge those worlds. Emma's relationship with her father was more complicated. She adored David and treasured their time together, but his absences left gaps in their connection that video calls couldn't fully bridge. She was proud of his service but resented competing with it for his attention. As she grew older, she became more aware of the toll his career took on him, the nightmares he tried to hide, the hypervigilance he couldn't turn off, the way his eyes sometimes focused on threats no one else could see. Dad lives in two worlds too, she once signed to her mother. The one with us and the one in his head. Catherine couldn't argue with that assessment. Despite these challenges, the Reeves family maintained a close bond. When David was home, they made every moment count, hiking in nearby state parks, having movie nights with captioning, and cooking elaborate meals together. When he was deployed, Catherine ensured Emma maintained connections with her extended family and the local deaf community. Emma had grown up with an acute awareness of her father's security concerns. From an early age, she understood that they didn't post family photos on social media, that she shouldn't mention her father's job to strangers, that certain topics were off-limits during video calls. She wore a medical alert bracelet identifying her as deaf and carried a card explaining her condition in case of emergencies. Catherine had drilled into her the importance of these precautions. Your deafness makes you vulnerable in certain situations, she'd explained. We need to be proactive about your safety. That Saturday in May began like any other weekend. David was 3 months into a 6-month deployment somewhere Emma knew better than to ask about. She'd received a brief video message from him the previous night, just 30 seconds of him signing, "I love you," and asking about her upcoming swim meet. Emma woke early, completed her homework, then asked Catherine if she could go to Westfield Mall alone. At 15, she was pushing for more independence, arguing that her hearing peers had far more freedom than she did. "Just an hour," she signed, her expression pleading. "I want to look for a dress for the spring formal. I'll stay in the main areas. I'll text you every 15 minutes. Catherine hesitated. Emma was responsible and capable, but the world wasn't always kind to young deaf women, especially young black deaf women. She'd witnessed too many misunderstandings in her advocacy work. What if someone tries to talk to you and gets frustrated when you don't respond? Catherine asked. Emma rolled her eyes. "Mom, I have my phone. I can type notes. I wear my medical bracelet. I'm not a child." After further negotiation, they compromised. Emma could go alone, but they would use a location-sharing app with a timer function. Emma would check in every 15 minutes, and the entire outing would last no more than 2 hours. As Emma headed out the door, Catherine felt the familiar twist of worry all parents feel when giving their children new freedoms, amplified by the specific concerns that came with Emma's deafness. But she reminded herself that independence was crucial for Emma's development. She couldn't protect her daughter from every potential misunderstanding. "Be careful," she signed as Emma bounded down the front steps. "Always am," Emma signed back with a confident smile. Neither of them could have imagined that within 2 hours, Emma would be face down on the food court floor, handcuffed and terrified, unable to explain to the officer restraining her that she simply couldn't hear his commands. Neither could have predicted that this ordinary Saturday would become a flashpoint for issues of disability rights, racial justice, and police reform. And neither knew that David Reeves, trained to remain calm in the most dangerous situations on earth, was about to face the most challenging mission of his career, obtaining justice for his daughter in a system designed to protect those who had harmed her. The security office at Westfield Mall was designed to be intimidating, windowless, stark, with uncomfortable metal chairs bolted to the floor. For Emma Reeves, it might as well have been a prison cell. She sat alone, her wrists raw from the handcuffs that had been removed only minutes earlier, her cheek throbbing where it had pressed against the food court floor. The security camera in the upper corner of the room captured her distress in clinical detail, a teenage girl signing to herself, rehearsing an explanation no one was there to see. Her hands shook as she practiced the signs, trying to organize the chaotic events into a coherent narrative for her mother. I was just sitting there, she signed to the empty room. He came up behind me. I didn't hear him. I reached for my phone to type that I'm deaf. He grabbed me. Emma's mind replayed the moment on loop, the sudden appearance of the officer, the confusion, the terror when he grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away, to create space to communicate. That's when everything escalated. His face had transformed from stern to angry as he interpreted her movement as resistance. She couldn't hear what he was shouting, but she could feel the vibration of his voice through his grip on her arm. The worst part had been the helplessness. As a deaf person, Emma had developed strategies for navigating communication barriers, writing notes, pointing to her medical bracelet, using simple signs that even non-signers might understand. But pinned to the ground, her hands restrained behind her back, every tool in her communication arsenal had been stripped away. Outside the security office, Officer James Mercer stood with Lieutenant Garcia, watching the body camera footage on a tablet. The video showed Emma's startled expression when approached, her reach toward her pocket, Mercer's hand grabbing her wrist, and her subsequent attempt to pull away. She was reaching for something, Mercer insisted, his posture defensive. A phone, Garcia replied flatly. And there's a medical alert bracelet clearly visible on her wrist that says she's deaf. I didn't see. That's the problem, isn't it? Garcia interrupted. You didn't see because you didn't look. First rule, observe before you act. He paused, then added with a pointed look, this isn't your first incident with a young black woman, Mercer. Mercer stiffened. That has nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? Your transfer to our precinct came with notes, officer. 2 complaints of excessive force with black female suspects in your previous district. Both dismissed, but here we are again. Mercer's jaw tightened. She matched the description of a shoplifting suspect. She was acting suspiciously. She resisted when I attempted to question her. She's a deaf teenager who couldn't hear your commands, Garcia countered, his patience visibly thinning. And now we have a PR nightmare on our hands because you couldn't take 5 seconds to observe the situation properly. Inside the security office, Emma had given up trying to rehearse her explanation. Her hands fell limply to her lap as tears slid down her cheeks. The events kept replaying in her mind, not just today's incident, but every warning her mother had ever given her about how the world might misinterpret her actions, might punish her for not responding to sounds she couldn't hear. She checked her phone. The timer she shared with her mother had expired 20 minutes ago. Catherine would be worried by now, possibly already on her way to the mall. Emma tried to text her, but a security guard had confiscated her phone after she'd been brought to the office, claiming it was evidence. Of what, Emma couldn't imagine. 3 miles away, Catherine Reeves stared at her phone in growing panic. The location-sharing app showed Emma still at the mall, but the timer had expired, and Emma hadn't checked in. She'd sent 3 texts with no response. This wasn't like Emma, who was meticulous about their safety protocols. Catherine called the mall's main security line, her heart pounding. My daughter is at your mall, she explained to the receptionist. She's deaf, and she's not responding to my texts. Her name is Emma Reeves. Can you please check if she's okay? The long pause that followed told Catherine everything she needed to know. Ma'am, there was an incident involving a young woman matching that description. She's currently with security and police officers. You should come to the mall immediately. Catherine's blood ran cold. Is she hurt? What happened? I don't have those details, ma'am. Please come to the security office near the food court. Catherine grabbed her keys and ID badge from the National Association for the Deaf, where she served as a regional advocacy director. As she drove, breaking speed limits and running yellow lights, her mind cycled through worst-case scenarios. Emma injured. Emma arrested. Emma terrified and unable to communicate. She called her lawyer, briefly explaining the situation. "Meet me there if you can," she said. "I don't know what I'm walking into." Then she did something she rarely did during David's deployments. She triggered their emergency contact protocol, sending a coded message that would eventually reach him through military channels. It was a system they'd established years ago, to be used only in genuine emergencies. In 15 years, she'd never activated it before. The mall security office door was guarded by a uniformed officer when Catherine arrived, breathless and frantic. "My daughter is in there," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "She's deaf. I need to see her now." "Ma'am, there's an ongoing investigation." Catherine cut him off, her professional advocacy training kicking in. "My minor daughter is being held without an interpreter present, which violates Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Either you let me in to interpret for her, or I call the Department of Justice right now to report a civil rights violation." The officer hesitated, then stepped aside. Catherine burst into the security office, her eyes immediately finding Emma. Her daughter looked up, face tear-streaked, and began signing rapidly. "Mom! They wouldn't let me text you." The officer grabbed me. I tried to show him I'm deaf. He pushed me down. My face hurts. They took my phone. I didn't do anything wrong. Catherine crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling before Emma and taking her hands, interrupting the frantic signing. She quickly checked her daughter for injuries, the bruise forming on her cheekbone, the red marks on her wrists, the tear-swollen eyes. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" she signed. Emma shook her head. Catherine turned to face the officers who had entered behind her, her expression transforming from maternal concern to cold fury. Officer Mercer stood slightly behind Lieutenant Garcia, his face unreadable. "Which one of you handcuffed my daughter?" Catherine asked, her voice dangerously calm. Mercer stepped forward. "Ma'am, your daughter was uncooperative during questioning about a shoplifting incident." "Officer Mercer, you handcuffed a deaf minor who was committing no crime, who was wearing medical identification, and who attempted to communicate her disability to you," Catherine interrupted, her voice rising. "She has marks on her wrists and a bruise on her cheek. I want your badge number, your supervisor's information, and the incident report. Now." Lieutenant Garcia intervened. "Ms. Reeves, I understand you're upset." "Upset doesn't begin to cover it," Catherine snapped. "My daughter was physically assaulted by an officer who failed to recognize or accommodate her disability. That's not just poor policing, it's a violation of federal law." She turned to Emma, signing rapidly. "Did they read you your rights? Did they tell you why they were detaining you?" Emma shook her head. "He just started talking. I couldn't see his lips clearly. When I reached for my phone to type that I'm deaf, he grabbed me." Catherine translated Emma's signs for the officers, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "She was reaching for her phone to communicate with you. That's what deaf people do when confronted with people who don't sign." Lieutenant Garcia intervened. "Ms. Reeves, I understand you're upset." "Upset doesn't begin to cover it," Catherine snapped. "My daughter was physically assaulted by an officer who failed to recognize or accommodate her disability. That's not just poor policing, it's a violation of federal law." She turned to Emma, signing rapidly. "Did they read you your rights? Did they tell you why they were detaining you?" Emma shook her head. "He just started talking. I couldn't see his lips clearly. When I reached for my phone to type that I'm deaf, he grabbed me." Catherine translated Emma's signs for the officers, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "She was reaching for her phone to communicate with you. That's what deaf people do when confronted with people who don't sign." Officer Mercer shifted uncomfortably. She matched the description of a shoplifting suspect. When she reached for her pocket, she was wearing a medical alert bracelet that clearly states she's deaf. Catherine interrupted, pointing to the silver bracelet on Emma's wrist. Did you even look at it before you assaulted her? Mercer's silence was answer enough. Lieutenant Garcia stepped forward. Ms. Reeves, we apologize for the misunderstanding. Your daughter is free to go. No charges will be filed. Misunderstanding? Catherine repeated incredulously. Is that what we're calling civil rights violations now? My daughter was profiled, assaulted, and traumatized because your officer couldn't be bothered to observe basic details before escalating to physical force. She turned to Mercer, her voice dropping to a controlled intensity that was more frightening than shouting. This isn't just about my daughter. How many other deaf people have you encountered and mishandled? How many other black women have you approached with unnecessary aggression? Because I know about your record, Officer Mercer. 2 complaints of excessive force against black women in your previous district. Both conveniently dismissed. Mercer's face flushed. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I train law enforcement on interactions with deaf individuals. I've seen this scenario play out too many times. The only difference is that you picked the wrong deaf girl today. Catherine turned back to Emma, signing gently. Let's go home, sweetheart. We'll deal with this properly. As they stood to leave, Catherine fixed Lieutenant Garcia with a steely gaze. I want Officer Mercer's badge number, your full name and badge number, and a copy of the incident report. My attorney will be contacting your department within the hour. Garcia nodded, writing the information on his business card. Again, we apologize for the misunderstanding. Save your apologies, Catherine replied, taking the card. What my daughter needs is justice, not empty words. As they walked toward the exit, Emma suddenly stopped, turning back to face Officer Mercer. Her hands moved in deliberate signs that Catherine didn't immediately translate. What did she say? Garcia asked. Catherine hesitated, then answered. She said, I hope you never treat another deaf person the way you treated me. We're not ignoring you. We just can't hear you. The drive home passed in silence, not the comfortable silence that often existed between them, but a heavy, traumatized quiet. Emma stared out the window, occasionally raising her hands to sign something before letting them fall back to her lap, as if the effort of communication was too much. At home, Catherine guided Emma to the couch and knelt before her, signing, Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. Emma's account was detailed and precise, her trained visual memory capturing aspects of the incident that would prove crucial later, the angle at which Mercer approached, from behind, making lip reading impossible, the exact words she could make out from his lips before he grabbed her, the force with which he pushed her to the ground, the indifference of mall security who stood by watching. As Emma signed, Catherine felt her professional composure cracking. This wasn't just another case of discrimination to advocate against. This was her child, her beautiful, brilliant daughter who had navigated a world not built for her with such grace and determination, now sitting before her with bruised wrists and a wounded spirit. When Emma finished her account, Catherine pulled her into a fierce embrace, feeling her daughter's body shake with silent sobs. Over Emma's shoulder, Catherine's eyes fell on a family photo, David in his dress uniform, Emma between them at her middle school graduation. David's absence in this moment felt like a physical ache. Your father needs to know, Catherine signed when they separated. Emma's eyes widened. But he's deployed. We can't just call him. There are protocols for emergencies, Catherine replied. I've already initiated contact. What Catherine didn't tell Emma was that she'd done more than send the emergency notification. She'd also contacted her network of deaf advocacy attorneys, the Department of Justice's ADA Compliance Office, and 3 journalists who specialized in covering disability rights issues. By morning, Officer Mercer's name and the details of the incident would be spreading across social media and news outlets. As Emma finally fell into an exhausted sleep, Catherine sat at the kitchen table, composing a detailed account of the incident while it was fresh in her mind. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues who had already heard about the incident through the deaf community grapevine. Videos from bystanders were beginning to circulate online. Catherine paused in her writing, overwhelmed by a wave of emotion. Anger at Officer Mercer. Fear for Emma's psychological recovery. Gratitude for the evidence that would make denying the incident impossible. And beneath it all, a cold certainty that this fight was just beginning. She thought of all the times she'd trained police officers on interacting with deaf individuals, all the scenarios she'd walked them through, all the simple techniques she'd taught them. How many had actually listened? How many Emma Reeveses without her resources and connections had suffered similar or worse treatment? Her phone buzzed again, a secure message from military channels. David had received the emergency notification and was being briefed. A wave of relief washed over her. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Catherine looked in on Emma one last time before trying to sleep herself. Her daughter's face in repose showed no hint of the day's trauma, but Catherine knew the invisible wounds would take longer to heal than the bruise on her cheek. "We'll make this right," she whispered, though Emma couldn't hear her. "I promise." If you were in Catherine's position, confronting the officers who just traumatized your child, what would you say? Would you have kept your composure? In Catherine's position, I would likely struggle to maintain the level of composure she displayed. The sight of my child traumatized, physically marked, and emotionally shattered would trigger a primal protective response that might override my rational thinking. I might have demanded immediate medical attention for my child before anything else. I might have recorded the entire interaction on my phone for evidence. I might have been less controlled in my language, letting my raw emotion show more clearly. The hardest part would be balancing immediate advocacy for my child with strategic thinking about the longer-term fight for justice. Catherine managed this balance admirably, securing the necessary information while also comforting Emma and removing her from the traumatic environment quickly. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have prioritized immediate emotional support for your child, or focused on gathering evidence and confronting the officers? The balance between these priorities is deeply personal and reflects our individual approaches to crisis management. By dawn the morning after Emma's detention, the first video had accumulated over 2 million views. Shot by a college student with a clear view of the food court, the 60-second clip showed the entire encounter in damning detail: Officer Mercer approaching Emma from behind, Emma's startled reaction, her reach for her phone, Mercer grabbing her wrist, Emma's attempt to pull away while her other hand moved in what was clearly a sign, and finally, the officer forcing her face down onto the floor and handcuffing her. The caption read, "Cop handcuffs deaf black girl at Westfield Mall for not responding to commands SHE couldn't hear. She was trying to sign that she's deaf. Hashtag deaf teen handcuffed." A second video, shot from a different angle, emerged an hour later. This one captured the aftermath: Emma being led away, visibly distressed, her hands still cuffed behind her back, unable to communicate. A mall security guard could be seen picking up her fallen medical alert bracelet from the floor. By mid-morning, both videos had been shared by celebrities, disability advocates, and civil rights leaders. The hashtag #DeafTeenHandcuff trended nationally, soon joined by hashtag #BlackDeafLivesMatter and hashtag #HandsOurVoices. News vans gathered outside the police station and the mall. Emma's story led the local morning broadcasts and was picked up by national networks by noon. Social media exploded with outrage across platforms. This is what happens when police aren't trained to recognize disabilities. That officer saw her signing and thought she was resisting. Disgusting. Hashtag deaf teen handcuffed. Notice how quickly he escalated to physical force with a black girl. No attempt to communicate, just immediate hands-on. This is why we say hashtag Black Lives Matter. As a deaf person, this is my worst nightmare. Our hands are our voices. Handcuffing us is like gagging a hearing person. Hashtag #HandsOurVoices. The police department's initial response only fueled the growing firestorm. Their official statement, released via social media and to press outlets, read: "The Metro Police Department is aware of an incident involving an officer and a juvenile at Westfield Mall on Saturday. The officer was responding to reports of shoplifting and approached an individual matching the description of a suspect. When the individual made a sudden movement toward their pocket and then resisted questioning, standard protocols for securing non-compliant subjects were followed. It was later determined that the individual was deaf and could not hear verbal commands. While the department regrets any distress caused, our officers must make split-second decisions to ensure public safety. A full review of the incident is underway. The statement made no mention of Emma's medical alert bracelet, the visible attempts to communicate her disability, or the fact that no evidence connected her to any shoplifting incident. Police Union Representative Michael Donovan doubled down during a hastily arranged press conference on the station steps, speaking over chants from a growing crowd of protesters. Our officers make split-second decisions to protect public safety, Donovan declared. Officer Mercer observed what appeared to be suspicious behavior and responded according to his training. We stand by our officers who put their lives on the line every day. When a reporter asked about the medical alert bracelet visible in the videos, Donovan dismissed the question. In a potential threat situation, officers are trained to secure the subject first. Identification checks come after the situation is controlled. By early afternoon, the mall's food court had become an impromptu gathering place for protesters. Deaf community members led demonstrations of basic ASL signs that could have de-escalated the situation. Signs for deaf, help, and wait were taught to hearing allies who joined the protest. Westfield Mall issued its own statement, distancing itself from the police action. The safety and dignity of all our customers is our highest priority. The actions taken by law enforcement yesterday do not reflect our values or protocols. We are cooperating fully with investigations into this incident and reviewing our own security procedures to ensure all customers, including those with disabilities, are treated with respect. As the day progressed, the story evolved from a local incident to a national conversation about the intersection of disability rights and racial justice. News analysts pointed out that deaf individuals from minority communities faced compounded discrimination and heightened risks in law enforcement encounters. Dr. Marlene Jefferson, director of the National Center for Deaf Studies, explained on a cable news segment, "What we're seeing in this case is the dangerous convergence of two forms of bias. First, the autism that assumes deaf people should adapt to hearing norms rather than the other way around. Second, the racial bias that views black bodies, particularly black female bodies, as inherently suspicious and threatening. Together, these biases created a perfect storm for this young woman." The National Association of the Deaf issued a formal statement condemning the officer's actions and calling for mandatory training for all law enforcement on interacting with deaf individuals. "This incident represents a catastrophic failure of policing," the statement read. "A deaf person's hands are their voice. Restraining those hands is equivalent to silencing a hearing person. We demand immediate policy changes and appropriate consequences for the officer involved." Simultaneously, Black Lives Matter organizers highlighted Emma's case as an example of how quickly police escalated to physical force when interacting with black individuals. "Would this officer have handcuffed a white deaf girl so quickly?" asked community organizer Darius Washington at a hastily organized rally. "Or would he have taken an extra moment to observe, to communicate, to de-escalate?" The data tells us that black children are not afforded the same presumption of innocence as their white peers. By evening, the protest outside the police station had swelled to over 500 people. Deaf participants led chants in ASL that hearing allies vocalized, creating a powerful dual-language demonstration. Signs reading, "Hands up means I'm signing," and "Deaf is not equal to dangerous," bobbed above the crowd. A group of black deaf teenagers performed a powerful ASL poem about existing at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities. Local news crews captured the moment when Catherine Reeves addressed the crowd, interpreting her own words into ASL as she spoke. "My daughter was assaulted by those sworn to protect her," she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. "Not because she did anything wrong, but because an officer failed to recognize her humanity. Failed to take even a moment to observe before acting. Failed to see the medical alert bracelet that could have prevented this entire incident." She continued, her hands signing in perfect synchronization with her speech. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. This is about systems that train police to react with force instead of communication. This is about a society that views difference as dangerous. This is about the daily reality that deaf people of color face in a world that is hostile to both their disability and their race. The crowd erupted in a visual applause, hands waving in the air, the deaf equivalent of clapping. Emma was not present at the protest. Catherine had decided to shield her from the media attention, concerned about the additional trauma of becoming the center of a national controversy. At home, Emma scrolled through social media with a mixture of validation and discomfort, seeing her experience amplified and analyzed by thousands of strangers. "Is this helping?" she signed to her mother when Catherine returned home. "Will anything actually change?" Catherine's answer was honest, "I don't know." But silence has never created change. As night fell, the police department issued a second statement, noticeably different in tone from the first. "In light of community concerns regarding yesterday's incident at Westfield Mall, Officer James Mercer has been placed on administrative leave pending a complete investigation. The department is committed to a thorough review of our training and protocols regarding interactions with deaf individuals and other disabled community members." The statement was too little, too late for many. Comments across social media dismissed it as damage control rather than genuine commitment to change. The hashtag too little too late quickly joined the others trending in relation to the case. Disability rights attorneys from 3 national organizations announced they were reviewing the case for potential legal action. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division confirmed they had opened a preliminary inquiry into the incident and the department's policies regarding disabled individuals. Local deaf community leaders organized a virtual town hall for the following evening, inviting police representatives to hear directly from deaf individuals about their experiences with law enforcement. The police department initially declined to participate, citing the ongoing investigation, but reversed course after public backlash. National media coverage expanded to include discussions of the broader issues at play. News magazines ran features on "Deaf While Black: America's Invisible Intersection." Cable news panels debated police training reforms. Morning shows interviewed disability rights experts about simple techniques officers could use to identify and communicate with deaf individuals. What made Emma's case particularly powerful was the visual evidence. Unlike many police encounters that became matters of disputed testimony, the videos clearly showed a teenager attempting to communicate her disability and being physically restrained for it. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, just a deaf girl trying to sign and an officer interpreting her communication as resistance. By midnight, as the protests dispersed with promises to return the following day, the videos had been viewed over 20 million times. Emma Reeves had become, without her consent or desire, the face of a movement at the intersection of disability rights and racial justice. In their home across town, Catherine sat beside Emma's bed, watching her daughter finally fall into troubled sleep. Her phone continued to buzz with messages from journalists, advocates, and concerned community members. She silenced it, exhausted by the day's emotions but steeled for the fight ahead. What neither Catherine nor the protesters knew was that halfway across the world, David Reeves had been extracted from his mission and was already en route home, carrying with him the focused intensity that had made him one of the most effective operators in special forces. The systems he had put in place to protect his family had activated exactly as designed. The machinery of his influence was already in motion, operating in channels far removed from hashtags and protests. The public reaction was just beginning. But another kind of response, quieter, more strategic, and potentially more consequential, was already underway. Master Sergeant David Reeves was 12 hours into a surveillance operation when his comm unit vibrated with the distinctive pattern reserved for priority command communications. He tapped his earpiece twice, maintaining his position in the hide site overlooking the compound they'd been monitoring for 3 days. "Reaper Actual," he whispered, using his operational call sign. "Priority homeplate," came the encrypted response. Immediate extraction. Firebird protocol activated. David's blood ran cold. Firebird protocol was the emergency contingency he'd established years ago, a direct line between his family's safety and his chain of command. In 15 years of special operations, through firefights and hostage rescues and covert infiltrations, he'd never felt the particular kind of fear that gripped him now. Copy. Status, he asked, already packing his surveillance equipment with practiced efficiency. No casualties. Civilian incident involving Sparrow. Extraction team inbound to your position, ETA 15 minutes. Full brief upon secure transit. Sparrow, Emma's designated codename in their family security protocols. No casualties meant she was physically safe, at least. But the activation of Firebird meant something serious enough to pull him from a classified operation. David's second-in-command, Master Sergeant Torres, gave him a questioning look from his position 3 meters away. Family emergency, David said simply. Command is sending replacement. Brief them on our observations when they arrive. Torres nodded. In their world, no further explanation was necessary. Every operator understood the sacrifice of family separation and the rare circumstances that would justify an emergency return. The extraction team arrived with precision timing, a two-man element in nondescript local clothing who led David through a series of pre-planned routes to a waiting helicopter. Within 90 minutes of the initial notification, he was aboard a military transport aircraft, finally receiving the full briefing from his commanding officer, Colonel Harmon. Your daughter was involved in an incident with local police yesterday, Harmon explained, handing David a tablet. She was wrongfully detained at a shopping mall. Physically restrained. No serious injuries, but the situation has escalated significantly. David swiped through the preliminary report, his expression hardening as he viewed the viral videos, read witness statements, and reviewed Officer Mercer's service record. The officer has a history, David noted, his voice dangerously calm. 2 previous complaints involving excessive force against young black women, Harmon confirmed. Both dismissed after internal investigations. And my daughter's medical alert bracelet? Clearly visible in the footage. The officer claims he didn't notice it before the physical confrontation. David continued reviewing the materials, his special operations training kicking in, analyzing the situation not with the emotion of a father, but with the calculated precision of someone who had spent decades identifying vulnerabilities and planning strategic interventions. The department is circling the wagons, he observed, reading the official police statement. Standard playbook. Defend the officer, cite protocols, promise a review that will ultimately clear everyone involved. Colonel Harmon nodded. Your wife has engaged legal counsel and disability rights advocates. The incident has gone viral. There are protests forming. That won't be enough, David said, his eyes still on the screen. Department's weather protests. They outlast public outrage. They're designed to protect their own. What are you thinking, Reeves? David looked up, his expression unreadable. I'm thinking it's time to apply some principles from our work to a domestic situation, sir. Carefully, Sergeant, Harmon cautioned. Very carefully. Always, sir. This is about strategic pressure points, not brute force. Every system has vulnerabilities if you know where to look. The remainder of the 14-hour flight was spent in methodical preparation. David made secure calls to contacts from his intelligence days, people who owed him favors from operations that would never appear in any official record. He requested specific information on the Metro Police Department's internal affairs history, Officer Mercer's complete service record including sealed complaints, and the department's financial arrangements with the police union. By the time the transport touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, David had compiled a preliminary intelligence assessment that would have impressed his Tactical Operations Center. He'd identified key pressure points, potential allies, and multiple courses of action. A nondescript government sedan met David at the airfield. The driver, a woman in civilian clothes who nevertheless carried herself with military bearing, handed him a tablet as soon as he settled into the back seat. "General Harmon said you'd want the complete package immediately, Sergeant Reeves," she said. "Everything we could compile on short notice." The tablet contained a comprehensive dossier, body camera footage, mall security footage from multiple angles, witness statements, Officer Mercer's personnel file, including the previously sealed complaints from his former precinct, and a detailed analysis of the Metro Police Department's history of handling misconduct allegations. David reviewed the materials with the detached professionalism that had made him exceptional at his job. But when he reached the security camera footage from inside the mall office, seeing Emma alone, signing to herself, tears streaming down her face, his composure cracked momentarily. "Sir," the driver interrupted his thoughts, glancing at him in the rearview mirror, "General Harmon asked me to remind you that you have options that don't involve personal intervention." David nodded silently. The general knew him well, knew that his first instinct would be to handle this himself, directly and permanently. But this wasn't a battlefield. Different rules applied, different strategies were required. "What's the current situation at home?" he asked. "Your wife has retained legal counsel. The ACLU and National Association of the Deaf have both issued statements supporting your daughter. Protests are scheduled outside the police department for the next 3 days. The officer has been placed on administrative leave, but the department's public statements continue to defend his actions as protocol." David processed this information, formulating his approach. By the time the sedan pulled up to his home, he had a clear plan of action, one that would leverage his unique skills and connections without crossing legal or ethical lines. The reunion with Emma and Catherine was emotional but brief. There would be time for processing feelings later. For now, David needed to understand every detail of the incident from Emma's perspective, to correlate her experience with the evidence he'd reviewed. After Emma had gone to bed, exhausted by the day's events and the surprise of her father's return, David and Catherine sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. "They're going to bury this," David said. "The administrative leave is just for show. They'll wait for public attention to move on, then quietly reinstate him." Catherine nodded grimly. "I know. I've seen it happen before. The system protects itself." "Not this time," David replied, his voice carrying the quiet certainty that had reassured teammates in the most dangerous situations. "I'm going to speak with Chief Wilson tomorrow." "And say what?" "These people don't respond to moral arguments, David. They don't care about our daughter's trauma." "I'm not going to make moral arguments," David said. "I'm going to present facts and consequences in terms they understand." The next morning, David Reeves arrived at the Metro Police Department headquarters dressed in a crisp suit that concealed both his military bearing and the cold calculation behind his eyes. His government credentials, vague enough to raise questions, specific enough to demand respect, secured him an immediate meeting with Chief Wilson, who was preparing for yet another day of damage control. "Chief Wilson, I'll be brief," David began once they were alone in Wilson's office. "My daughter Emma was wrongfully detained yesterday. I've reviewed the evidence and found multiple violations of department policy and federal law regarding treatment of disabled individuals. Mr. Reeves, we're conducting a thorough investigation." "I'm not interested in investigations designed to protect your department," David interrupted. "I've seen your public statements defending Officer Mercer. I've watched your union representative dismiss my daughter's rights as an inconvenience to police procedure. And I've reviewed Officer Mercer's complete file, including the sealed complaints from his previous precinct." The chief's expression changed. "Those records are confidential." "How did you?" "That's not important," David said. "What's important is that Officer Mercer has a documented history of using excessive force against young black women, and now my deaf daughter has become his latest victim. This isn't just about disability rights anymore, Chief. It's about a pattern of behavior your department has chosen to ignore." David placed a USB drive on the desk. This contains video analysis from 3 different angles, witness statements your officers didn't bother to collect, and a legal brief outlining the ADA violations committed yesterday. It also contains copies of the complaints against Officer Mercer from his previous precinct, complaints your Internal Affairs Division conveniently omitted from their preliminary report. And it contains a proposal. A proposal? 3 things. First, Officer Mercer completes comprehensive training on interacting with deaf individuals, developed and led by certified instructors from the deaf community, plus implicit bias training with a focus on interactions with Black women. Second, your entire department implements mandatory disability awareness and racial sensitivity training. Third, you create a special unit with officers fluent in ASL to respond to incidents involving deaf individuals. That's a tall order, Mr. Reeves. Budget constraints are not my concern, David interrupted. My daughter's civil rights are. I have connections to funding sources for police training initiatives. That won't be an issue. The chief studied the man before him. And if I refuse? David smiled slightly. Then instead of standing beside you at a press conference announcing progressive reforms, I'll be standing beside my daughter's attorneys as they file a lawsuit that will cost this city millions and your department its credibility. And I'll be sharing Officer Mercer's complete history with every media outlet willing to listen. The implied threat hung in the air between them, not just of legal action, but of the kind of comprehensive public exposure that could end careers and dismantle institutions. Chief Wilson recognized the look in David's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in special operators he'd worked with during his military service before joining the police force. It was the look of someone who had calculated every variable and was prepared to execute with precision. I'll need time to review your proposal with the commissioner, Wilson said finally. 24 hours, David replied, standing to leave. After that, we proceed with alternative measures. As David walked out of the police headquarters, he knew the battle was just beginning. Chief Wilson might agree to his terms, or he might choose to fight. Either way, David Reeves was prepared. He had not spent 15 years in special operations without learning that sometimes, the most effective warfare wasn't fought with weapons, but with information, leverage, and the absolute commitment to see a mission through to completion. And he had never been more committed to any mission than obtaining justice for his daughter. For 2 weeks following David's meeting with Chief Wilson, progress seemed promising. The department issued a revised statement acknowledging the unfortunate incident and committing to a comprehensive review of policies regarding interactions with disabled individuals. Officer Mercer remained on administrative leave. The police union's aggressive defense softened to carefully worded statements about learning opportunities and community healing. Chief Wilson held a press conference announcing the formation of a disability engagement task force that would include representatives from various advocacy organizations, including the National Association of the Deaf. He publicly committed to implementing disability awareness training for all officers within 6 months. We recognize that we can do better, Wilson stated, looking directly into the cameras. This incident has highlighted gaps in our training and protocols that we are committed to addressing. The protests gradually dispersed. The hashtags slowed. National media moved on to newer controversies. Even local coverage shifted from outrage to cautious optimism about institutional change. Catherine remained skeptical. They're waiting for the attention to fade, she told David one evening. I've seen this playbook before. David nodded. That's why I'm documenting everything. Every promise, every commitment, every deadline. Emma tried to return to normal life, but the incident had left invisible scars. She jumped at unexpected movements. She refused to go to the mall. She kept both hands visible when interacting with strangers, an unconscious defensive mechanism that broke her parents' hearts to witness. Her therapist, a coda, child of deaf adults, who specialized in trauma, explained that Emma was experiencing a form of PTSD common to deaf individuals after communication-related trauma. She's lost her sense of safety in public spaces, the therapist signed during a family session. Her deafness, which was never a source of shame for her before, now feels like a vulnerability that can be weaponized against her. 3 weeks after the incident, the department's Internal Affairs Division completed its investigation. Despite public promises of transparency, the findings were released late Friday afternoon, a classic timing strategy to minimize media attention. The 12-page report concluded that Officer Mercer had acted in accordance with department protocols for securing non-compliant subjects. While it acknowledged that, in retrospect, additional observation might have identified the subject's disability sooner, it determined that under the circumstances and given the information available to the officer at the time, his actions did not constitute misconduct or excessive force. The report recommended additional departmental training on recognizing and accommodating disabilities, but explicitly cleared Mercer of any wrongdoing. He would return to active duty the following Monday, though he would be assigned to administrative tasks, pending completion of supplementary training. Catherine received the report via email while interpreting at a conference. She forwarded it to David without comment, then excused herself from the session, finding an empty meeting room where she could release the tears of frustration and rage that had been building for weeks. When she arrived home that evening, she found David at the kitchen table, the printed report before him, methodically highlighting sections with a yellow marker. "They're gaslighting us," she signed furiously after Emma had gone to bed. "They're acting like Mercer just made an honest mistake, like Emma's civil rights weren't violated, like this whole thing is just an unfortunate misunderstanding that everyone should learn from and move on." David looked up from the report, his expression unreadable. "They're following the standard playbook. Delay, deflect, defend, then dismiss. So that's it. They brutalize our daughter and just get away with it. What about the task force? The training? All those promises? The task force will meet a few times, issue recommendations that will be filed away and forgotten. The training will be minimal, ineffective, and treated as a box to check. The promises were never meant to be kept, just to defuse the situation until public attention moved elsewhere." David's signing was precise, controlled, betraying none of the cold fury building inside him. "So we just accept this?" Catherine demanded. "No," David replied, his sign suddenly sharp and definitive. "We don't accept this. But we need to be strategic. The department has shown its hand, they're choosing to protect their own rather than serve justice. So now we move to the next phase." "Which is what?" David didn't immediately answer. Instead, he closed the report and looked at his wife with the same focused intensity that had preceded some of his most dangerous missions. "Do you trust me?" he signed finally. Catherine studied her husband's face, recognizing the shift in his demeanor. This wasn't David the father or David the husband. This was Master Sergeant Reeves, the man who operated in shadows and accomplished objectives that would never appear in any public record. "Yes," she signed. "But I need to know you won't cross certain lines. Emma needs her father home, not in prison for doing something reckless." "I won't cross those lines," David promised. "But I will get justice for our daughter. The department has made their choice. Now they'll face the consequences." The next morning, David told Catherine and Emma he needed to handle some paperwork related to his emergency return. In reality, he met with his former intelligence contact in a coffee shop 20 miles outside the city. "I need everything," David said quietly. "Internal communications about the case. Financial records for the department and the union. Personal and professional dirt on Wilson, Mercer, and anyone else involved in burying this. I need to know who's protecting whom and why." His contact, a woman who had once been one of the CIA's top analysts before moving to the private sector, studied him carefully. "This is personal for you." "Yes. That makes it dangerous. I'm aware of the risks." She nodded slowly. "I'll need 3 days. And David, remember that scorched earth leaves nothing to rebuild on." For the next 2 weeks, David Reeves executed what would have been classified as a covert intelligence operation in any other context. He established a secure workspace in a rented office under a shell company name. He created a detailed link analysis chart connecting key players in the department. He compiled evidence, verified sources, and built an airtight case that went far beyond his daughter's incident. What emerged was a pattern of misconduct and cover-ups that spanned years. Officer Mercer's history of excessive force against black women was just the tip of the iceberg. Internal emails revealed that Chief Wilson had personally intervened to have one of Mercer's previous complaints sealed after the victim threatened a lawsuit. The police union had paid settlements to 3 other complainants in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Most damning of all, David uncovered a private text message group where 12 senior officers, including Wilson and Mercer, regularly exchanged racist and ableist messages. They had specifically discussed Emma's case, with Mercer referring to her as another entitled deaf girl playing the victim card, and Wilson assuring him that this will blow over like all the others. David's contact came through with financial records showing questionable transactions between the police union's legal defense fund and a consulting company owned by the brother-in-law of the internal affairs director. The pattern suggested a systematic diversion of funds meant to defend officers to instead pay for covering up misconduct. As the evidence mounted, David refined his strategy. A frontal assault, going directly to the media or filing a lawsuit, would allow the department to circle the wagons again. They would deny, deflect, and ultimately discredit the accusations. No, this required a more sophisticated approach, striking simultaneously from multiple angles to prevent an effective defense. On a Monday morning exactly 1 month after Emma's handcuffing, David's operation went live. At precisely 9 a.m., 3 entities received identical packages: the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, and a respected civil rights attorney who had previously sued the department successfully. Each package contained meticulously organized evidence, the text messages, the financial records, the buried complaints, and a detailed analysis connecting it all to a pattern of discriminatory policing and institutional cover-ups. The evidence was anonymized to protect sources but included verification methods that would stand up to legal scrutiny. At 9:15 a.m., 3 journalists from different outlets, local television, national print, and a popular online news site, received emails with selected portions of the evidence and contact information for 5 former victims of similar misconduct who had agreed to break their NDAs. By noon, the story had exploded. The civil rights attorney held a press conference revealing the text messages and statistical evidence of discrimination. The local news led with the financial irregularities and questionable internal affairs practices. The online outlet published first-person accounts from previous victims, including 2 young black women who described encounters with Officer Mercer disturbingly similar to Emma's experience. The department was caught completely off guard, facing attacks from too many directions to mount an effective defense. Chief Wilson issued a hasty statement claiming the materials were obtained illegally and taken out of context, but the damage was done. By evening, the mayor had called for an independent investigation, and the state attorney general announced a formal inquiry into the department's practices. Within 72 hours, Chief Wilson was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The police union's initial aggressive defense crumbled when the financial irregularities were made public, forcing them to distance themselves from the implicated officers. Within a week, the Department of Justice announced a pattern or practice investigation into the department. The text message group proved to be the department's undoing. The messages were indefensible: explicit racial slurs, jokes about excessive force, mockery of disabled individuals, and specific discussions of covering up misconduct. Within 2 weeks, all 12 officers involved, including Mercer and Wilson, were terminated for conduct unbecoming an officer. The mayor, facing re-election and desperate to distance himself from the scandal, appointed an interim police chief, a respected black woman with a background in community policing, who immediately announced comprehensive reforms. The specialized unit for interactions with disabled individuals that David had originally proposed was established as a priority initiative. Mandatory training on implicit bias and disability awareness was scheduled for all officers. Throughout the department's implosion, David Reeves remained invisible. No evidence connected him to the leaked information. No public statement mentioned his name. He was, as he had been throughout his career, a ghost who accomplished his mission without leaving traces. Emma watched the news unfold with mixed emotions. The vindication was satisfying, but the ugliness of the exposed text messages, particularly those mocking deaf people, reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. "Did you do this?" she signed to her father one evening as they watched the interim chief announce the formation of the new specialized unit. David considered his response carefully. "I helped the truth come to light," he signed. "The department did this to themselves." Emma studied her father, seeing him with new eyes, not just as the dad who learned ASL to communicate with her or who taught her to swim, but as someone capable of dismantling an entire system that had wronged her. "Thank you," she signed simply. David pulled his daughter into a hug, his eyes meeting Catherine's over Emma's shoulder. Catherine's expression held a complex mixture of emotions, relief at the justice being served, lingering anger at what their daughter had endured, and a new understanding of exactly what her husband was capable of when his family was threatened. The Metro Police Department scandal became national news, a case study in institutional corruption and the power of accountability. Officer Mercer and Chief Wilson became examples cited in police reform initiatives across the country. The Specialized Unit for Deaf Interactions became a model adopted by departments nationwide. And Emma Reeves, who had never sought the spotlight, found herself with a platform and a purpose. Her experience, though traumatic, had created an opening for change that would protect others like her. In that, she found a measure of healing, and the first steps toward reclaiming her sense of safety in the world. 6 months after the department's implosion, Emma Reeves stood at a podium in City Hall, her mother interpreting beside her as she addressed the newly formed Citizen Police Oversight Committee. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," she signed, her movements confident and clear. "But when systems fail, people must stand up. Change doesn't come from hoping things will get better. It comes from demanding better and not backing down until you get it." The committee members watched attentively, many wearing small pins with crossed hands, the symbol of the police department's new Deaf and Disability Engagement Unit, DDEU, which had become a model for departments nationwide. Interim Chief Vanessa Rodriguez, whose interim title had been removed after her reforms gained national recognition, nodded as Emma spoke. Under Rodriguez's leadership, the department had undergone a transformation that few had believed possible 6 months earlier. The DDEU, initially proposed in David's original meeting with former Chief Wilson, had evolved beyond even his vision. The specialized unit consisted of 8 officers, 3 of whom were CODA, children of deaf adults, fluent in ASL, and one who was hard of hearing himself. All had undergone extensive training in various disability accommodations, from autism to mobility impairments to sensory processing disorders. Every patrol car now carried communication cards with basic pictograms and ASL illustrations. Officers wore badges indicating if they knew ASL, and all department members received mandatory training on recognizing and accommodating disabilities. Body cameras were reviewed regularly not just for misconduct but for learning opportunities in disability interactions. Most significantly, the department had implemented a community response protocol that prioritized de-escalation and communication over immediate physical control, a direct response to what had happened to Emma. The incident with Ms. Reeves forced us to confront failures in our training, our policies, and our culture, Chief Rodriguez acknowledged when Emma finished speaking. "While I regret the circumstances that brought us here, I'm grateful for the opportunity to build a department that truly serves all members of our community." The reforms extended beyond policies and training. The department's hiring practices now actively recruited officers from diverse backgrounds, including those with connections to disability communities. Psychological screening was enhanced to better identify candidates with concerning bias patterns. And perhaps most importantly, the Internal Affairs Division had been completely restructured with civilian oversight to prevent the kind of cover-ups that had protected Officer Mercer. For Emma, watching these changes unfold brought a complex mixture of emotions. The trauma of her experience hadn't disappeared, she still struggled with anxiety in public spaces and remained hypervigilant around uniformed officers. But seeing concrete reforms implemented gave purpose to her pain. She had begun speaking at schools and community organizations about her experience, always emphasizing the intersection of disability awareness and racial justice. With her mother's support, she established a youth group for deaf teenagers of color, creating a space where they could share experiences and develop advocacy skills. "Your voice matters," she would sign to these teens. Even when, especially when, others try to silence it. David watched his daughter's evolution into an advocate with quiet pride. After ensuring the reforms were genuinely implemented, he had returned to his unit, carrying with him new perspectives on justice and power. His commanding officers noticed a subtle shift in his approach to operations, a heightened emphasis on understanding cultural contexts and communication barriers in the regions where they worked. The Reeves incident, as it became known in law enforcement circles, sparked changes that rippled across the country. Police academies incorporated the case into their training materials as an example of how quickly situations could escalate when officers failed to recognize disabilities. Departments in major cities established their own versions of the DDU, often consulting with Chief Rodriguez on implementation. The National Association of the Deaf created a standardized training program for law enforcement, using Emma's experience as a case study. The curriculum was eventually adopted by police training centers in 38 states. Medical alert bracelet manufacturers partnered with disability organizations to distribute free identification to deaf individuals in underserved communities. Perhaps most significantly, the Department of Justice used findings from their investigation of the Metro Police Department to develop new guidelines for law enforcement interactions with disabled individuals. These guidelines, while not legally binding, created benchmarks that civil rights attorneys could reference in future litigation. 1 year after the incident, Emma received the Youth Leadership Award from the National Association of the Deaf. In her acceptance speech, delivered in fluid ASL, she reflected on the journey from victim to advocate. "When I was handcuffed for trying to communicate, I felt powerless," she signed. But that moment of powerlessness led to discovering power I never knew I had, the power to speak truth, to demand change, and to help others find their voices. She paused, her hands momentarily still. "I didn't choose this path. But now that I'm on it, I choose to walk it with purpose." Catherine, watching from the audience, felt tears well in her eyes. Her daughter had always been resilient, but this transformation went beyond resilience. Emma had alchemized trauma into purpose in a way that humbled her. David, home between deployments, sat beside Catherine. He remained in the shadows of Emma's advocacy work by mutual agreement. His methods enforcing accountability had been effective but existed in an ethical gray area that wouldn't withstand public scrutiny. His contribution to justice would remain known only to a few. "She's extraordinary," he whispered to Catherine. "She's her father's daughter," Catherine replied. Determined to right wrongs, no matter the cost. The reforms born from Emma's experience weren't perfect. Implementation varied across departments. Budget constraints limited training in some jurisdictions. Old habits resisted change. But the needle had moved, measurably, meaningfully moved. Statistics compiled 18 months after the incident showed a 64% decrease in use of force incidents involving deaf individuals in departments that had implemented the new training protocols. Body camera reviews identified and corrected potential escalation situations before they became problematic. Officers trained in disability recognition reported higher job satisfaction and fewer civilian complaints overall. For the Reeves family, the impact was simultaneously public and deeply personal. Emma's advocacy work continued alongside her education, shaping her plans to eventually study disability law. Catherine incorporated the case study into her police training curriculum, using it to illustrate both failures and best practices. David carried the lessons back to his unit, subtly influencing how special operations teams approached civilian interactions in complex environments. On the second anniversary of the incident, Emma returned to Westfield Mall for the first time. She walked through the food court, past the spot where she had been handcuffed, and felt the expected surge of anxiety, but also something unexpected, a sense of completion. What happened here had been wrong, but it had led to changes that would protect others like her. As she sat at a table not far from where the incident occurred, a mall security officer approached her. Emma tensed momentarily until she noticed the small pin on his uniform, the crossed hands symbol of disability awareness training. He signed a simple greeting, his movements showing basic ASL proficiency. "Just checking if you need any assistance today," he signed and spoke simultaneously. Emma smiled and signed back, "No thank you. I'm just reclaiming this space." The officer nodded in understanding and moved on. Emma watched him go, reflecting on how such a small interaction represented such enormous change. Do you believe systems can change from within, or does real change require outside pressure? Have you ever seen justice delayed but eventually served in your community? Systems rarely change from within alone. Meaningful reform typically requires a combination of internal champions and external pressure. In Emma's story, we saw how internal protocols failed until external forces, public outrage, legal threats, and David's strategic intervention, created unavoidable pressure for change. The most effective reform often happens when those inside the system who recognize its flaws are empowered by outside pressure to implement changes they already know are needed. Chief Rodriguez could transform the department because external circumstances created the opportunity for her vision to take hold. Justice is frequently delayed, sometimes for years or decades. In many communities, we've seen cases where wrongful convictions were overturned after new evidence emerged, or where persistent advocacy eventually led to accountability for misconduct that was initially dismissed. These delayed reckonings remind us that the arc of justice may be long, but persistent pressure from committed individuals can eventually bend it toward fairness. What about in your experience? Have you witnessed situations where justice seemed impossible but eventually prevailed through persistence?